Hello, I will begin already. I'm very, very excited to welcome you to this panel discussion that for me is kind of this cherry on the top of the cake of the Common Room project. So it is connected with the framework of the installation that we did for this year's Tbilisi Architecture Biennial in Warsaw, in the area of Służewiec. And I'm very excited to gather such an interesting panelist having a multidimensional perspective on the issues that were very relevant to us in the project. So I will shortly explain you the structure, how it will go generally. So you all the guest knows when to ask a question and so on. I will do the introduction, then give voice to each of the participants for short, and then start with the main question round that I would like to finish with questions from all of you. So you can raise up your hand and then I give you the voice, or you can also in meantime ask questions in chat and I will collect them and then put them all together. Let me shortly welcome Paulina. Cool. So now I can really begin with the greetings of panelists' presence. So with us today is Tina Gurgenidze. She's an architect and curator based in Berlin. Monika Komorowska, an architect and sociologist based in Warsaw. Paulina Paga, cultural researcher and animator based in Lublin. Helene Schauer, an architect based in Vienna. And Adrian Jut, urban designer based in Vienna. And my name is Joanna Zabielska. I was the initiator of the Common Room #1. I am artist and urbanist and based somehow in between of Vienna and Warsaw. And I gathered you all because I wanted to connect with the topic of this year's Architecture Biennial. What do we have in common? I have a feeling that you work extremely interdisciplinary, not only that each one of you have different disciplines, but each person even moves in between of 2 or 3 disciplines, I have a feeling. And your projects are realized on very different scales, from the urban planning perspective on a local authority level, like a city authority level, through the formats like biennial or like local activities, like in case of Paulina in Lublin. So I think the comparison of scales is very interesting, but also of the stages of projects. Some of them are having big regularity, some have this kind of punctuality, and this I would like to discuss with you. But first I give a voice to you for the short introduction, and I would simply propose to go how my screen is showing, to start with Tina Tin, then go Monika, Paulina, and Adrian and Jut. Adrian and Helene, sorry.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Joanna, for organizing this symposium, and to all your team for the wonderful installation that you have made. So I'm Tina Tin. I'm one of the co-founders of the Tbilisi Architectural Biennial, and I'm based in Berlin and Tbilisi, and I'm working I'm dealing with urban issues, especially in the peripheral mass housing neighborhoods. Yes, I work in this area and with this topic, more or less. So this is very short introduction.
And hello, my name is Monika Komorowska and I'm based in Warsaw. I will refer to a project that is almost a decade old now, but for me it's a kind of important experience that shaped my career. Back then, 10 years ago almost, I was working with my friends, architects, artists, sociologists, and different kind of activists in an association called Unblock, and we wanted to concentrate on the areas of block of housing and how can we make the environment there better for the people. And my path was, I don't know if it's typical. I might say it's quite typical for our association, because now I work together with Marlena Hapach, the founder of this association that became a city architect of Warsaw. And I work in the office run by her, and I'm a city official so it's, I don't know, the path from activist to city official. I might comment a little bit on why and am I satisfied at the moment after these 10 years. So this just briefly about me.
Hello, my name is Paulina Haga. I'm happy to be here. If I was to be very short, my role is being in between. So I'm a facilitator, and I'm often initiating or moderating the dialogues in between the communities, the social side, and governmental side or business side. It's up to actually the situation. I'm anthropologist. I've graduated culture studies, and for the first almost 10 years of my professional life, I was working with communities on the field of community arts, and I was redefining narratives and working on narratives within the communities to help them shape the language of their interests and to stand for themselves or for different fractions. And during this time, while working with different communities, I was asking myself this question: what does these people have in common? I mean, if I go to so different environments and people from different backgrounds, refugees, people being in prisons, local communities in danger of exclusions, random neighborhoods of newly established estates. And then I thought that it is housing, that one of the questions, the matters that could make people act for their nearest environment would be actually capacity for co-creating and for their involvement in co-creating public spaces, the nearest neighborhoods, and housing matter. And because there were no such capacities to shape this career in my hometown, in Lublin, so together with a group of architects, of urban researchers, we have just, sorry for my cracky voice, I have just COVID, so I'm nearly coming back home. So I mean, back to life, but if I speak sometimes nonsense, I will try to concentrate more. So together we decided to do something for our neighborhood, establishing museum, and further on I will develop. But for us, it was very important to be from here, to be authentic, to build the trust on the sense of common identity of us people being raised, the 4 generations that had been shaped by these particular spaces, but also to call it louder for the people who define themselves in Vienna, in Tbilisi, in Warsaw, in small towns, as the residents of housing estates. And so we started this experiment 3 years ago, and now I'm in museum, and I was hoping to show you more, maybe at the end, because the light had drastically changed in the last 5 minutes. So if you are interested, I can show you after the session.
Definitely, we'll give you a few minutes after the talk to guide us through.
Yeah. Hi, so I'm Helena, and that is Adrian. I'm an architect, and Adrian is an urban designer, as Diana already explained. And we have worked together on several multidisciplinary projects, also with other people, and not always together, almost always concerning topics of public space also. We both work in offices that deal with architecture and urban design. We both also teach at university, and this is like the work that we're doing aside. And we know Joanna from Tbilisi, actually, because we have the thought of our project was next to Joanna's, and so we had a lot of exchange also about our projects and the experiences that were going on with Common Room 1. So it's really cool to follow also Common Room 2 now and how it's in a different setting. Yeah.
Yes, I think what describes our approach is a little bit that we always work in different interdisciplinary teams. So for us, it's also interesting to understand the different perspectives on different topics. And I think what lies in our interest is always the question, not only about public space, but interacting with public space or the public in general, to learn, to produce knowledge, and of course to use that knowledge then in later stages or phases or in the work as architects and urban designers. So it's not like only about the artistical approach, but it's also to use this approach of interventions and artistic techniques to gain a knowledge which helps us to deal in different or in similar settings, but in different stages of the architectural and urban planning processes. And I think that's for us super interesting also, I think, in this group of different professions to share all these different experiences and point of views.
Thank you so much for this short introduction. So I would like to begin with the first question that I would love to direct to Monika. And I think, Monika, with your praxis is particularly interesting that you have this both perspective for this kind of like work within an association that is bottom up, it is self-initiated. You had then a complete freedom with your choices and artistic freedom as well, because you were the one in charge. And then now you have the perspective on almost the other side, in the sense of the city authority, where there are more restrictions as well, but also more possibilities. And I have here like two questions actually that I would like to merge with one. The first is to throw this term of a tactical urbanism and city acupuncture and combine it somehow with the strategic planning. So I'm very interested, what is now your approach to these issues? And do you try to merge both techniques, or you rather decide for one of them? And the other part is the whole participatory methods in the architecture and planning process. And I know that you are trying to encourage them and incorporate, and you fight for recognition of these techniques. And I remember well your text that you wrote in Odnowa publication. And there you defined architecture as a part of an activism, or you combined these both terms. And I would like to hear from you how you relate to this now. Is still like kind of an activism, a next step over participation? And with this aspect, I give you voice to your hands. Very curious.
I feel more comfortable about the second part of the question. It's easier for me to start with it, because I think what I managed to do, but not, I wouldn't say on my own, but it was an effort of different group of people, different associations, different projects, different grants from coming to Poland from the outside. participatory approach to architecture and urban planning is a part of our public life at the moment. I'm quite proud to say that when we met, we actually met in a different institution of city of Warsaw. That is, I started my career as an official in Center for Public Communication, and there already in 2014, based on my experience as a city activist working in Odbloku, we initiated with a group of my co-workers different grant projects, trying to convince authorities responsible for urban planning and architecture that actually city officials, but also city planners working for them can benefit from the knowledge of people coming from the participatory approach. And what was interesting for me at that point, it was already 6 years ago, that actually urban planners back then were very much afraid of talking to people. And why was it so? Because our law, our spatial law, always stressed participation, but in a very on reverse, I would say. The law stressed participation in the end of the process. So once the design was ready, the planner was supposed to talk to people, and all my friends who were planners were completely afraid of starting of this talk, because what was going on? People were quarreling. Why this decision? Why creating this here and not here? We use this piece of land differently. We prefer it differently. So what we started to do then, it was saying, okay, participation is not a wrong tool for planners, for us city officials, but it has to start very early in the process. And then I was listening very carefully to what you all said. I think in the beginning, all methods, all creative methods are allowed, so that we see the people, that we see the identity of the place, and that we see the needs of the people. And then now it's very much standardized what we do. Mostly concentrate in my work. I would use the term, as Paulina said, as a facilitator. I'm not really working neither as a sociologist exactly or a planner. What I try to do is to catalyze the contact between the planners and the people who gain the knowledge from the people, so that lead themselves the public consultation. And we do it in 3 phases. So the initial phase, before the project of the local development plan starts. Then we do workshops, meeting with people, a lot of talking, consultation points in the place that the plan concentrates on. Then there is a phase that lasts from 1 year to 2 years when the concept is done. And we go back with the concept to the people to show it, so they can comment on different variants of this concept. And still planners are happy to introduce changes. And then there is this last phase of showing the final design, but then we say, hey, we've been talking to you for so long, please remember the outcome of these previous phases, and now see the design. If you still have to or want to comment on this, of course you are welcome, but be aware that at this phase we want to finish the project so it can actually start to be the scenario for this part of the city. So this is like for the participation, I would say my work is less exciting at the moment than it used to be this 10 years ago, because as I mentioned, it's standardized and I'm not so much doing it myself, but it gives me a lot of satisfaction that more and more planners tend to accept it, the participation and all the creative methods of working with communities. Still, not everyone, because I would say that sometimes I'm even surprised that the star architects of our local scene, they tend to be very skeptical. I think it's the skepticism goes away once people, the designers, are in the process themselves, and they have time and good partners to do the participation together. But when they read about it, one of the big names of Polish architecture said, when I was presenting the outcome of the workshops for one of the areas, and they said, "Oh, it's so nice that now in Poland we are so much au courant with the trends, the European trends of talking to people, but I say the design is most important part of it all. So now please stop. I will present what we've done." And I felt so like angry with the person, but it happens. It still happens. But what I think the big change of the last decade it's the scale of what's going on. All over Poland, we have people that designers can turn to and ask for help with participatory approach. And not to be too long, the tactical design. It's like the problem. Don't disturb me, please. Nie przeszkadzaj. Sorry, my son is so keen on being in the camera, you know. But the tactical design, it's also very much the problem of the law in Poland that is not very much concerned with the time factor. So all the authorities all over Poland are trying to making as much local development plans as possible, but the plans themselves, they don't solve the problems, because even in Warsaw, the areas that they have plans, but it's huge area and without infrastructure. When it's not said that this part should be developed then, and after this part we go further on with the development, it's a huge challenge, and especially for the city officials and the city budget, because then when something is created here and then there, and there is school lacking, of course the new inhabitants would address the local authorities. So I think it's still a lot to be done about the tactical design. We try to do it. As an office of city architect, we try to introduce charrette workshops for big areas of the city, so to bring different parties together and discuss about the future of certain areas, taking the local law aside, just talking to gather information and what would be needed, what would be possible. But it's very challenging. And at the moment in Warsaw, the new big spatial strategical document is being under elaboration. It's called Studium in Polish, and we cope a lot with the different conditions that change over time, especially now with the pandemic. So just briefly on that.
Thank you so much. You already mentioned many terms that I'm sure the further participants will go as well, focused on. That's why I would like to move to Paulina. I will throw on you as well one term that we talked shortly about, this placemaking. I like throwing these terms. I know it was kind of an initial idea of yours, but then the process developed in the different direction. And actually, I'm most curious about the process of your project, because I have a feeling that it evolved extremely. And you had aims that you started with that, I don't know, I assume might have been fulfilled in the meantime. And I'm very curious how you evaluate the project as well, like when you have to make new aims to continue, when could you perceive the project as a finished one? And I'm also very curious about the process of making yourself visible and participatory in the neighborhood, because you started with a position of a stranger and now you turned into this integral part of the neighborhood. So how did you reach this? I'm also very curious. And also if you are in some certain moment of transformation now or soon or not.
I would start to refer to what Monika said. Because I had this 10 years experience of living in Warsaw, and then I moved back to Lublin. And still, from Lublin perspective, which is a peripheral town, Warsaw capacities and logic are considered very progressive, and this is also political issue. I mean, the political contexts and the situation that we operate in, and so so I'm watching with curiosity what's going on in Warsaw, what's going on in Gdańsk, Katowice, and so on. But actually, from Lublin perspective, we have decided that with this atmosphere of growing mistrust between local government and activists and locals, that the definition of participation is something that have appeared in Lublin quite recently, but actually already now I have a feeling, compromised. I mean that we've been invited to conduct first participatory planning process, I guess 4 years ago in Lublin, and none of these processes that we have conducted haven't even started its realization, and the communication in between people who are involved within the processes had just drastically stopped. And so within these conditions, we still do believe in this kind of processes, but we wanted also to take care about our personal reliability and involvement, and to be able to prove that actually when we bother people to get involved, that their energy, their time, this trust is for something. So that's why we decided to go back to, in a way, a punk stage and just create a non-institutional bottom-up museum. And it was a format that we also got to after, I guess, 4 years or 5 years of the projects that were just granted by public money, but in a grant logic. So when we had the grant, we were doing things. When we didn't have, we weren't. And so when people were asking us, what's the next step, when to meet you, when can we absorb this knowledge production that we have produced all together, we didn't have clear answers. Also, it was interesting for us to experiment with this process on the territory that is non-municipal. I mean, we operate at the territory of Lublin Housing Cooperative. That was one of the most recognized socio-engineering, but also political experiment that was a success. And that was experimenting with actually with participatory budget in the back there in the 60s under under the system that weren't particularly affording for it, but they were experimenting with this democratical tools, I would say. And now it's very much compromised, and it's no man's land in terms of transparency and like newest standards of communication. So we wanted to start up with a format that is readable also for the elderly, who defines themselves as the only remaining activists at the district, which was very surprising for us, because when we asked the residents that were in city councils that are in the age between 70 and 90, they considered themselves as the only remaining activists here. So we also understood that it cannot operate, that the communication is not possible within this logic, and it's also not possible within the logic of this huge demographic change, where the standards of these estates are considered pretty low. So, I mean, differently, it's up from the direct location. Some of them are still posh, some of them are are low standard apartments for the students. And so the students have a very big rotation, and they have no possibilities or no legal status to get involved. But they are now they are 40% of people living there. So it's a huge number according to the population. So we established the format that is dialogical, that creates frames for the dialogue, where people could disagree. But before they do disagree, that they have something in common, that they have some common sense of common values or something like common identity that they could create like from a puzzle to puzzle, and that they could relate to. So we used deliberately this feeling of nostalgia, also to play with it aesthetically, and to invite people to bring objects and stories, and to share the story, and then to refer from one story to another. And then when we achieved this level, we have asked them to start talking about the current situation when we gained this trust. And it was funny because within the format of museum, we were titled by the local cultural newspaper that is informing about the cultural events. And we are the only museum in Warsaw that has no contents and actually not in Lublin, sorry, that has no contents and actually the nothing. And we were literally waiting at this empty table for 7 months with a coffee and collecting stories, and people were coming and asking what is going to be going on here. And we were like, well, it's up to you, but we tell you our idea about it, and we would like to propose some frames that you would feel. And surprisingly, from a very local initiative, there came the question of the commoning and COVID situation that locked us down. And surprisingly, we discovered that we have many topics in common that are determined by global challenges, economic contexts that are common for such states in Ukraine, in Lviv, in Kiev, in Tbilisi, in Berlin, also in Leipzig, and so on and so on. Yes, so we were surprised to see that actually the topics, the discourse that we are reaching is bigger than us. It's much bigger than us, and also our crisis within thinking of mistrust on the local level in Lublin and of lack of partners to this discussion. The situation brought solution itself, because it started being a situation and a dialogue that is much wider than the Lublin context. And so it also took the feeling of or the temptation of blaming one or another side, because some of the situations we have defined as just systematic problems, and that are deeper than people that are in charge of decision making. And so to conclude, I would say that that we started from the phenomena of housing estates as a political solution to housing issues, and as democratic tool from the 58 regarding this particular housing estate. And we not ended, because we're still in process, but concluded for now on political level, that it is the political decision, and it is about the priorities and what we pay attention, what do we invest our money, what is what is the logic that we follow. and that this is something maybe more on the level of advocacy. And we try to conduct these processes, but using also our methodology and aesthetics, which is a bit from arty field. I mean, we are not 100% serious. We make collages, we make games, we use quotes of very softened quotes from internet users, and we play with these logics also for ourselves to have fun from doing it, but also to encourage the dialogue that is not so much about putting the blame and about this feelings of anger and disappointment, but about common imagining of potential futures that could be in our share, maybe not very soon, but I would like to believe that it still could be a share of my generation still being active. And we have, we have good attitude from our elder colleagues that were 70 and 90, saying that they are the only remaining activists. So maybe then we will be able to show the proof of, look what we did. Now it's your.
I hope. I definitely hope, because I think we are all in this generation that we consider ourselves getting there a bit direction of activism. And thank you, Paulina, so much for the points you made. And some of them I would like to immediately pass into direction towards Tinatin, because I think you mentioned this international level, like what you said in between, that you recognize there were similar patterns in other areas, in other countries. And this is, Tinatin, the area that you are moving as well with the NGO of the Kabristan, but with Tbilisi Architecture Biennial, of course. Like you collect these different discourses with different countries on the international level, but same time you have this perspective of being a researcher as well, but as well an architect. And what I found extremely interesting to ask you for is the fact that you are working with communities from this perspective, and especially the communities that this art and architecture discourse is not in their daily life. It could be even considered not being valued also, or valuable there. And these communities you are approaching and entering there, like Gildani with the in 2018. And I'm curious, like how you build a trust as well with the community, how you start the discourse there, because you again have the outsider perspective, bringing even in the international level there, but you are as well very there present in the space. And this I would like to link with next question, more like general. It's how much of these projects that you are developing or installation belongs to the neighborhood, and how much still or in which extent to the authors. So in a way, how you incorporate the wishes of a community, but without compromising, or maybe with compromising, on the artistic integrity. And the question is as well, what is your priority?
Thank you, Joanna. A lot of questions. I will try to. Well, what you just asked me, this is the most frequently asked question after 2018, when we organized the first edition of the Tbilisi Architectural Biennial in Gdani, in one of the large housing estates in Tbilisi. Well, like from my perspective, because we were organizing the entire event, it's really not so easy to say how we connected or what tools we used to connect with the community. I think it was more like some specific projects that happened in the frames of the biennial, like yours, for example, Joanna, the Common Room 1, and of Helena and Adrian, also like your project, because you're also part of the first edition of the biennial. I think the specific projects, they managed to have the connection. And actually, I always talk as an example, the common room one, because I think that was the best example that we didn't even have to dismantle the installation, because the people started using it before the biennial was over. And actually they took all the furniture already, like they stole it and then they started using it to sell their second-hand clothes. So I thought, yeah, this installation really worked well in the location. No? So yeah, like this time that we had, less than 1 year, it's not enough to come so close to the community. Well, with some projects we managed it, with some we didn't. Till now I try to look at our event very critically and also observe if it really influenced something there. But this year we had another project happening there, a workshop in the frames of the ECTA project, the same project that is supporting your installation, Joanna. So we saw already that there is more interest in the neighborhood, which is also very, very important. So the students or some architects or urban designers, they are now more interested in this neighborhood or the others that were not so popular, so to say, before. So I hope I answered your question more or less.
Completely. If I can, I will still come back with this topic of the artistic approach in your case, because Dekabristen also support art project festivals that I'm sure are on the symbolic level, that needs kind of a translation to reach the communities. I'm also wondering how you select the projects, because as I understood, the Dekabristen is more supportive, not initiator per se of this specific artistic project. And how could you see the sustainability of this action? Because this is a little bit like creating a point, an interaction that can develop in certain direction. And do you have this kind of strategy, how you want this things to lead? What is your idea behind, maybe now from the side of Dekabristen more?
Well, I cannot talk that much on the behalf of the whole NGO, because I'm only involved in this ECTA project, and we don't do that much with our artists. It's actually we supported the Biennial because the Tbilisi Architecture Biennial is one of the partner organizations. So that was the reason why these projects are happening in the frames of the Biennial. So I cannot really answer that question from my perspective, because I'm only involved with this project, which was kind of interdisciplinary. Well, it's finishing this year, that's why. We did, it was more like interdisciplinary and educational project. So we didn't do that much with artistic interventions or things. So maybe you can ask me more.
I will pass on a little bit similar questions to Helene and Adrian. This is a quite simple question, but for me it was repeating itself so often during the common room production or then implementation, and we had a constant discussion not only in the neighborhood about it, but even in our team. And as banal as it sounds, but why? What for? Why to do these things? Why to do this kind of installation, like common room, but other ones in the space that are maybe punctual and temporary. And I believe that each one of us has answer, because it drives, of course, our activity. We have this kind of personal manifesto, and that's why, of course, we do these things. But I'm very curious of your personal manifesto in these terms, and kind of like I'm also curious concerning to your projects. Now I'm speaking less about the academic ones, but more the installations that you are doing in the spaces and also in the people temporary ones. What is the sustainability of these projects, and what can you kind of produce in terms of knowledge with it, and what are the limitations?
So quite a lot of questions again. I think like concerning why do we do these things, I think that we have to there are two approaches. If you have a long-term project, of course it's not this kind of acupuncture, but if it's just like a 2 weeks project like in Tbilisi, it's about raising awareness, and not only the awareness Tinatin talked about, also from other people, that architects or students come to Guldani and see these places differently and also be aware of these places, but also for the people who are living there to raise awareness for their spaces, basically, and for the things that are already there. And I think it's a bit different when you have projects that are more long-term. There you can start really like also implementing changes. With 2 week projects, I think it's almost too short to, it's just like this implementation to start something, but it's maybe you wanna.
Yeah, I think it's what was mentioned before already several times also from Monica. It's always the question of time, because in terms of an urban perspective, I mean, urban planning, we talk about a time frame of 15 years to develop, like in development, and so it's a complete different time horizon than an art installation of 2 weeks. But nevertheless, it's also like important, or we understand it always as in this way of like design research or research as design. So for us also it's like to do installations, and by doing the installation, we learn a lot as well. And I think that's very important because that's a knowledge which we can use further on. And I think that's like always this kind of questions. I don't know, sometimes it's because in different situations, it's a different kind of also financing system of the art installations. And in some parts, you can only get a financing for an art project, even though you know that actually the documentary would be the more important aspect of it. But usually the funding stops at the end of the project, even though you need actually another funding for the for actually putting all the knowledge together and sharing the knowledge. And I think that's always like a super difficult question. And for us, sometimes it's really a little bit depressing because we have so much knowledge, and it's such a shame that it's just like in our heads and we don't have the opportunity or the time to actually work with it and present it, because it always needs time. Because knowledge is a difficult term, because you have like the local knowledge of the inhabitants. We have the knowledge of the professionals talking about if it's like sociologists, if it's architects, they have specific knowledge. And I think like those kind of projects enable a certain kind of communication, that knowledge is shared between those kind of different knowledge languages. And I think that's an important aspect. And I think it's this kind of enabling people to rethink. And I think for us, sometimes it's like the best projects are if we only have one person, which actually then after a talk with us, it's like, oh yeah, that's an interesting point of view. I haven't thought about that before. And I think that's like what keeps us going, and what's also the fun in all the projects. It's like to have this exchange of knowledge. And also for us, it's the same. Like sometimes we are just like, oh my God, that's wow, super interesting. And we learned a lot and we changed our perspective on, on the subjects.
Yeah, and I mean, like Adrian mentioned already, it's like this really also a quick tool to really dive into place and topics very easily, rather than like this classical participation processes that really need time. But when you're like working just in a group of 1, 2, 3, 4 people, and you really have to dive into a project, then how do you learn things from a space? It's like being there, being active there, and talking to people, and how do you get in contact with people? I mean, I think Paulina said something really interesting about not being too serious. I think that's also like an approach in our projects, like this, not being too serious, but taking the topic serious, like with having also fun and getting in contact, and with being on site. You learn a lot, but of course you take the topics and everything around and the people who live there and are in this neighborhood super serious, but you get easily in contact just with these interruptions or acupunctures, or however you may call it.
And I think it's like with our project in Tbilisi last time, it was super nice to see that all the material like was taken by the locals, and they invited us to have a drink with them, and they were super proud to show us their home where they're going to use the materials. And that was like a really warm feeling, like to get this kind of like, because we respected like their self-built processes, like not as something critical, but really like to say like, okay, that's interesting, like that's something, like it's not only like informal building, but that's how you build and live, and you always kind of realize your own dreams. And so they were super proud to show us where they lived, and that was super amazing. I think that's kind of continuity with the project, like dissolves into the neighborhood, and people continue living with it. And another project I did last year and this year with the Biennial in Ljubljana, we did like a kitchen with university students, and moving from different faculties to faculties, started cooking and inviting teachers and students to like try new forms of knowledge production while cooking. And in the end, like the architecture students, they took our kitchen, and now it's part of the architecture faculty. And the students actually started, it was pre-COVID, like in the end of last year, and they started actually to develop a kind of university program, like within the student groups, that they have like a dinner or coffee, and the students talk about their projects and present their projects to them. So that's again like a super nice thing when the project is just like evolving, and you can just like give the project, hand it over, and say, okay, now it's you can deal with it. Yeah, or it's similar to what happened to Joanna's installation. It was taken over and adapted, transformed, and I think that's super interesting also for us to learn and see.
Thank you so much for the first question round. Like I was making notices, and there were the terms that were in each speak of yours coming back, like the topic of knowledge, trust, and this regularity or not. And also what was very important, I think what we are doing now, what our installations are doing, is this dialogue. And I must say, like as well, talking about the documentation that you pointed out, this format of Biennial that is partly digital due to COVID made me realize one part of the project that was not so clear for me, the whole interaction with the knowledge that you gain, actually, because as this time I could not be as much present there on site. I had this time that I usually don't have to actually feed social media with informations, to try to reflect more on it, have many talks, to organize this panels discussion from yesterday, the symposium that most likely would not happen if I would be only fully covered with the installation action. And I find it's a very crucial point that we, after this project, have the time to reflect and kind of pass this knowledge on, or at least like open up a discussion and maybe do this ping pong, because you never know when this knowledge can be useful. Of course, it's a powerful tool to have knowledge. It's also responsibility, because there are hopes maybe of people, and you have to prove what goes on with it. But it was interesting part for me, and I'm very thankful for this symposium. And now I would really like to give a voice to the audience or panelists as well. I have, of course, a bunch of questions as well, but I think all of you have some. So please either raise your hand and I can unmute you and give you voice, or chat, or write down in a chat, then I will read it. Or you can also, as panelist, go ahead and ask. I give this 1 minute of awkward silence so someone can be first.
I checked the Facebook, but there are also no questions there.
Okay. Good. Then I will maybe continue. Like, I think the great question is, what do we have in common? So maybe in a very banal way, I will throw it on you. And you were already like commenting what the other people said from like after, before you. But any of you recognize in particular the common aspect in approach of other panelists? Maybe it's a very general question.
Well, I think what unites us all is that we try to work like bottom up and not always like look at things from the top, and also experiment and see what happens. Yeah, I don't know.
I like this word of experiment, actually, because this is how I saw my installation. That for me, it was a big experiment, because by any chance, like, we could not work really in an academic way. It's not a knowledge that could be understood as a research, because we're not following researchers' tool. But still, like, it was an experiment that I have a feeling that it could have a great value. And maybe with this, Monika, I would like to come back to your aspect of Służewiec, because it was very interesting that you were working with this area, but actually a little bit different part of it, of this Dolinka Służewiecka. And I have a feeling that it is quite a different universe than Służewiec Fabryczny. And I'm curious, like, how was your experience at the end with this specific neighborhood?
I will share the pictures with you. Mm-hmm. So it's as I mentioned, it's already. I will go here. It's already a project. Can you see it now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. It has a couple of years. I think for me, at that time, what was crucial for us back then, it's were the contacts with the experimental practices like Raumlabor, and we were all at the time in our early 30s looking for our way in the professional career. And I think what we all lacked back then, after some couple of years of practices in urban planning offices or architectural offices, it's like a lacking of the real contact to people who use the space. So actually this project for us was very, very personal, because it's actually started, we found it in winter, we found it at Blockwood in the apartment of my friends who live actually in the top floor of one of the housing, used to live there. And we thought about the quality of living there, because the area, it's absolutely, as you mentioned, different from Służewiec Fabryczny. it's dense with apartments. It's all prefabricated. What's interesting is this kind of design is present in a couple of locations in Warsaw. The characteristic leg, the balcony with the leg. So we had a very basic idea of putting one of the apartments outside to the area that was, in our opinion, not used well enough, because it was pure nature with a little stream, a lot of greenery. And it happened to it's also for us, I think, talking about personal experience, was this, that it happened quite immediately, because we managed to get funding back then. And in half a year, we created actually this project. For us, it was the happiness of really being out there, not only talking about it, not only the dream of doing things like others do, but actually manage to create it and see the interaction. I also value very much what you said about not being serious, because I think one of the challenges is like, okay, we've done it. The project lasted like 3 weeks, but then what? I think with what we managed to do back then, it's to inspire really a lot of people all around Poland, because we were one of the initials of this kind of activities in Poland. So actually that was the value, but what about the neighbors? What about the people who visited us? And I think it's more meaning it as a trigger for different local activities, and not putting too much stress on yourself to really change it immediately. This is how it looked. We talked about a lot about history, because now, since then, we had a lot of really many projects talking about this heritage of architecture of 60s, 70s, and 80s. But back then, no, it was kind of neglected heritage, that living in a housing blocks, housing estate wasn't the sign of success. Now it's kind of different, because people trying to appreciate the quality of living there, because of the schools, because of the playground, because of the open areas, and not living in a gated communities. But then it was like most people preferred to move out. But we wanted to say, hey, look, this design has some ideas behind it. There were architects. There were also, it was funny because we invited those architects to our pavilion, and they were talking about their inspiration. So it's like each generation over and over again has this external inspiration. It says my internet is not very good, so I don't know if you really hear me well.
We do.
Yeah. So here, this is us. It's like big family at the time, and we now each of us have a different path. But at the moment, this collectivity was very important to us, and I think it's like doing what we do all here, gathered all here. I think friends are crucial. Friends and family. When the founding is not there, your personal car or your father, the help of your brother, it's absolutely cannot be underestimated. And all these activities now, I think we all work a lot and see it a lot with different cultural festivals, art festivals. For us, it was something new to be out there in nature, in a spot created by us. And we were really very happy. This young girl here is now the city architect, Marlena Hapa, and the founder of it. I think she personally had to cope with a lot of criticism. And it's like, it's not really kind of serious what she's doing. But I think based on these many projects done bottom up, I think she got a completely different perspective on how to create urban planning and develop city. We cooperated also with artists, our friends, of course. This is the music machine that it all created kind of situation that turned perception of this place. This I said, beautiful nature, but kind of neglected, not very often visited. Maybe back then, especially during the winter season, with no paved paths. So yeah, and the yoga class, of course. And here a little bit further, a friend of ours created a mural about the history of the place and the presence of the Dutch population couple hundreds years before. So just to mention the context, how it used to be. So I don't know if I really answered your question. Should I refer more specifically, Joanna, what you've asked?
I can actually put the next question to you from the audience, because I saw some two appearing in a chat. I begin with the first one. Probably it is meant for each one of us. And it is in one sentence, if you could catch what your aims, goals in your projects and work in public spaces. So I guess it's this kind of one sentence to get a core of our manifesto, as I understood the question.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think for us back then, it's like unveiling the local potentials to show what's there, actually.
Mm-hmm. How about the others? For example, Paulina?
When I saw this question from Robert, I guess, it made me... it provoked me to think, what do we as speakers have in common? And for myself, I have answered that I think we are sharing quite close imagination of the dialogue and of the shape how people could participate within shaping their places of living, and how they could influence the priorities on shaping the spaces. So probably we would differ in particular, matters, but actually on the general level and on the level of values, I think that we are at the very similar spot as all of the speakers, so that we share some image of a future, like where we are heading to with this kind of work.
How is it for you, Helena and Adrian?
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Tina.
No, it's okay.
Go ahead. I only go after you know how I see you. Jump in front.
Jump in, Tina.
Okay. Well, I think our main aim is to reclaim the public spaces and actually to make the residents understand that these spaces are their spaces, because that's something really that we lack of in Tbilisi. There's like activity in the urban sphere and of the dwellers. So to make them understand that this is their space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that is where we can totally relate to. This was the awareness we were talking about, like for neighbors and also for other people.
Yeah, I think this raising awareness is a crucial aspect of working in public space. And I think what is interesting is those kind of different levels or stages, like referring back to the of time. Well, there's this initial questioning or raising awareness, which is a trigger to maybe what we always hope to start a process. Then it needs the second phase of getting the trust and involvement with the participants. And I think that's a little bit like what Paulina is working on. It's like the second phase where it's really about developing trust with the local people, because within 2 weeks, well, there's a certain kind of trust, but we can't propose anything because we know we are going to leave in 2 weeks. So we can't make promises about anything. So it's just like a pop-up trigger or raising awareness factor. Then it's this kind of continuity to work with the people, to get the knowledge, to collect the knowledge in a museum. And I think then it's like the part where Monica is working, like then, or on the next phase, okay, how to use that knowledge in a strategic way of like changing the physical or process settings of, well, is it like to change the communication? Is it to change physically, or is it maybe just like to allow more things to happen? I mean, it's always the question, like what is design? Is it like a physical transformation, or is it maybe just to ask a different question of like how to modify certain rules, like a legislative design transformation, which can even change even more than physical adaptations. And I think then like the next phase is like this kind of analytical approach in an international level, then to share those kind of experiences. And I think like as professionals, that's like, I mean, it's always about best practices and learn from each other. And you can't just, do it like one-to-one, because what we've learned in Tbilisi is like, it's completely a different way than German prefabricated settlements, and people behave completely differently because they have a different cultural background, but still we can learn certain things which might be implemented in a different way. And I think that's then like super interesting, and I think that's what this talk makes so interesting, to have like those different levels of involvement in those time perspective.
I think it was really beautiful summary of your stages where each one of us is there. So I hope it was a good answer for Robert. I can also just add on that I consider myself in the very early stage of this, and kind of my praxis, if I would have to put one word of this, it would be more interruption. So interruption in this daily routine to question and reflect, and it can generate the knowledge, but as art praxis have this kind of limitations, of course, I'm not going further in the next stages. But there is already a second question that is directed to Paulina. Were you discussing with people only content of your museum or also form?
I think the best way would be to have a quick look on what we have. To first explain the idea is that this labyrinth is divided into two rooms, and one room is actually two rooms, two spaces are the scenography of apartment, of a flat from between 60s and the 80s. And when people started bringing us stuff, we've realized that they are arranging our apartment and that they are treating us like we were a new married couple moving into, and they were asking like, do you have a table? Okay, you will need a table. Do you have something to put on your like a toaster? You would need a toaster. We used to use a toaster, and then we asked them for their comments of how they remember it, and some different people were relating to maybe people brought by the others and their objects. And they started weaving stories. And then we had like hours and hours of recordings that we have edited. So they created a talks. So these people didn't meet in the real reality, and they didn't probably talk about this particular topic. But from these phone talks, because we have, we'll show you, we have put them more light. Okay.
Nice to be there with you in the museum.
Music, and then there is a conversation on certain topic that didn't happen in life, but that is going quite deeply actually, and specifically about either past experience or the views on the future. With this part, okay, this is a map of we wanted people to mark themselves and to find where they live.
Paulina, we hear you bad when you move.
I have put my fingers on the microphone. Yes, technical issues. So we wanted to prove there that at that time, this 50% of urban layout of the estates was the greenery, and with these puzzles, let me move them like this. So each card has a star, and where the star is, there is described the building of infrastructure. And by this, we wanted to talk about the infrastructure that was under the logic of designing these estates. And also here we have also curated part of the exhibition on these terraces. And we took under consideration the model projects or model approaches to design the estate. So some of them were related to Red Vienna tradition and Polish zakład osiedli robotniczych. So the first, afterward, the first assumption that the state will deliver the housing. And then the model cooperative estates. And then estate Zamość. It was also curated by us. That was one of the 5 assumptions from governmental project PR5. So PR5. It was like it was huge investment, governmental investment to design, to pay architects and designers, interdisciplinary team, to think of new model approaches to design housing estates. And actually this estate in Zamość is still very, very current. Here, so you see the materials. Use very simple aesthetics. But also it's like it's cheap. Yes, I mean we had 1,000 zlotys, which is which is how much euros?
300? No, 250. What is actually? I think personally, always by the project should be mentioned the budget of them, because this enables to go in certain direction or blocks you. Like the first common room was also done with no budget. So that's why my aesthetical solutions and decisions were going in completely different direction than this time, that I had the luck to be financially supported and could buy fresh materials and go different aesthetics.
So in our assumption, it was that it lasts temporary, and that then people can add new quotes. For example, this map was people, so you could not see the map anymore. Here, there is. I cannot show it. There is. Please help me. Pęknięcie.
A scratch.
The roof,
it's more.
The roof is pulling down the pavilion, and this inlay wall is the only construction site that is holding it, and actually it proves the stage of aging of this architecture. And the spicy thing is that it is designed by one of the most recognized architects from the second half of 20th century, Zofia and Oskar Hansen. And so by this we ask questions about this kind of heritage and the assumption of design under open form idea. So how do you how do you protect the open form if it's by the idea supposed to be open and working and transformable by the people? Here it was one. I cannot. Sorry that I cannot make the zoom here in this Zoom, but well, one lady started speaking about the future of this pavilion, and we decided to put it here, and then to put empty slots of paper for the people to ask them questions about how they perceive the potential futures. And the funny thing is that the light in the pavilion is operating so strongly that all of their answers faded away, beside one answer, that is Slovackiego estate lives that long as people living and their memory. And so the Wileńska market, it's big success, but what faded away, and you can almost not read it, is opinion by a constructor that said that these pavilions, that on the moment when the design was delivered, that they knew that maintaining it will be much more expensive than actually delivering it. So that it was an error from the beginning, that it was not designed under these pragmatic assumptions.
I think, Paulina, without knowing it, you already started answering the next question.
No.
That's actually good, because I can ask it though to other people.
I just want to show you that.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
By inhabitants.
The furniture.
Yes, we have to, and you can dig in the well, everywhere, and they are very like sorry for the light. Now stuff, and they are the comments. And here, for example, there was a topic about female and the kids, and this room is.
We don't hear you.
Sorry, colleagues with feminist approach came to ask us why the smallest room is always dedicated to female and kids, and why does it have to be that female are connected with the kids? Parenting is stuff of both of the mother and father. And I said, well, we've been to Hansen's, so the designer's house in Shumin, and actually Zofia Hansen had space for her studio, for sleeping, and for a storage of her stuff, whereas her husband had much bigger space. So maybe it reflects kind of the times that these narratives are set in. And we started from this very simple stuff. And the last thing I wanted to show you is the game. Okay, let's go there. Because I'm sure Tina is over of listening of this game, because we had a conversation regarding another project. So I'll try to be short. So this is of Tatari estate. This is working class estate that is now one of the most neglected. And we wanted to find positive narratives about it, and actually to present it as one of the model ones. And we did the game about, it was called Zukunft estate, so future estate. And we asked municipal investors, developers, and inhabitants about their speculations on future scenarios if very particular things happen. And by these logics and by these interviews, we constructed the game itself. And for example, it's like that when we have a feeling that that our discussions are not absorbed by the municipality, for example. But on the museum events, there are coming the directors of municipal offices, for example, the director of architecture and urban planning, to play the game with us. And we deliberately changed the roles, so he cannot play his own role. So recently, he was together in the team in one of the most controversial activists in Lublin, and they were together playing the role of developer. And of course, they won. But the logic is thought that the residents are strengthened by algorithms, so they also have capacity to win. Last thing. At the entrance. We are situated in a very site-specific situation, site-specific context, because we are next to the sewer and the hairdresser. And you have to find us in a labyrinth, but this mirror is remaining from the previous hairdresser. Once again, maybe like this. It's unwashable anymore, but we say that we use it as a metaphor, and we invite people to come and mirror their experiences with experiences of the others that are visiting the estate. Okay, sorry, I was trying to be fast.
No worries, I really like the tour, and I even think you already grabbed the third question, but I will still repeat them, and maybe as we are soon coming to an end of a talk, I will group them together. So each one of you can choose whatever to approach. So here came a question from Jacek. Are you somehow encouraging people to interact with you and your projects, or you are just waiting for them and observing? And the second question is connected with notice from Bilal that I find it's difficult to create more inclusive participatory project when architecture and art are not considered as a fundamental element of education growing up, for example, in marginalized communities. In this sense, how do you approach this with this foreign language and I guess prevent loss in translations between residents, architects and planners? Would you consider the non-serious, funny and playful approach as a result of this? So I give you the voice for last time to connect these two questions.
Okay, I will try to be short. We've been waiting in museum in regular hours with a coffee, and because the museum is situated in the pavilion, so we are transparent as fish in aquarium. So whenever I am there, it's visible from the market because it's situated at the market. I forgot to tell, I considered it as obvious, but it's very important that it is human specific and site specific situation, and that we are operating in one of the most authentic and viable markets. And we are just like live installation. And we are there. When we were beginning, there was 6 of us. Later on, we had less and less fundings. So there was only 1 or maximum 2 people, and the energy was much lower. But we collaborate with the housing cooperative. So each season, for example, winter, autumn, we have different poster. And they have put these posters on every block. And now we have a deal that they printed ourselves. So even for people who are using this very analogic, not digital, I mean, not digital technologies, we communicate somehow and they are just coming. And if somebody comes, there is this kind of chain that another person comes and another comes. But to do the participatory projects, my experience is that it has eaten me up. I mean that when there was 6 people, and it was, as Monica said, it was fun, it was the energy and so on. But then when I was having my shifts alone, as this fish in this pavilion. There were coming people whom I didn't want to talk to anymore. And I was suggesting that maybe they would go, but in very, polite way. And they were saying, but these are your hours, you are supposed to be here for me. And it was also about this personal borders and the personal costs. That's why we wanted to, while having less fundings, to create it on less local level and more put this accents on this bigger discussions. And referring to the third question, please remind me quickly.
Sorry, I have to shortly cut it.
I had some three sentences, one sentence actually, about the third question. But could you remind me, what was it?
It was about the education, that the architecture is not in the discourse. But I would also like to give, as we're in the limit of the time, for a last sentence to you, of course, so you can manage to finish, and then to everyone to close the round. We have just like 5 more minutes.
This is actually what it led us to, that architecture education is also civic education, and that we strengthen this path as museum to actually invest and start doing educational projects dedicated not only to students but to kindergarten and school pupils, and treating them very seriously, also using this sometimes not so serious aesthetics, but we treat it as ćwiczenia z myślenia. So I would translate
Practice from the thinking.
Yes, exactly. So thank you for this question, because
thank you so much.
I think this is very important strategy of museum for now.
Would you like Monica, Helene, Adrian, or Tina to add something, like kind of last sum up sentence?
For us, the communication initially back then was very important. It's like it was quite empty there. So without encouraging people, passing the word to neighbors, it wouldn't work. So I think now what you mentioned with social media, it's quite essential, I think, to gain a bigger network. So you can really use the resources and the time that you are there. And for these foreign languages, I think that architects is like the profession of public trust. And I think what we try to do with our project in Odbloku is like to use the language and the aesthetics that could easily be referable, the point of reference to people. But of course, it might be, I don't know, for some discouraging or this, but we didn't want it to be like that. It's to introduce all these activities like cooking and gymnastics and workshop for kids. We try to make it as normal as possible, so that the other part, the exchange, come on the top of this everyday experience. Thanks.
Thank you. Helena, you wanted to say still something?
No, I think it's interesting. I can totally relate to things that Paulina said. I mean, also this projects that we do, like on when it's only a 2 weeks project, it's not that it's so much that we encourage people to interact with us, but the project is actually already doing it. So in the best way, the project, and also this playful nod to a project that is actually touching real subjects of the space, is reaching out to people and is kind of working as an icebreaker somehow. So in the best way, as I experienced it, is more that people would come to us and asking us, what is this about, and why are you doing that, and making them to come to us, and like also because then you get them to talk and share their points of view more than like if you're asking kind of them, come on, participate. It's more like to raise an interest for them to be part of that, or give a statement about what is going on rather, I mean, it doesn't matter then if it's a dislike or a like, or I have something to say about it, but it's this contact is to get in contact. This is the project work as an icebreaker, I think.
Yeah, I think I want to because playfulness does not mean not serious.
Yeah,
projects are serious, and engaging in a local community has to be done with a seriousness. So, but playfulness means something else. So it needs to be serious, but playful. And so I think that's important to say. It's not like just out of the blue something, but it's always serious. And I think the topic about the language, it's by engaging in public space, you create a knowledge, and you don't necessarily need to talk to people to learn. And especially also with a little bit of sociological background, you never ask a person, do you like living where you live? I mean, that kind of question doesn't help to understand anything. So it's rather engaging in space with people, in front of people, and that creates knowledge. So you don't need to talk to someone like verbally to learn.
Cool. Thank you so much for the summary comment, Tina.
Yes, I totally agree with what you said, Adrian, right now. And well, I think it's kind of a both, also to initiate something and then see what it brings, but also involve the residents in the working process. And for us, I think it's like both. It's kind of, but on the first place, I think it's to raise the interest, and why should we be intervening in an urban areas, no? To kind of also encourage the students and all the locals and other architects to understand that this kind of things are important. Because in Georgia, we don't have the experience of doing this cultural projects in the neighborhoods, and especially architects. It's like starting now, we see how they also start to think more in this direction. So, but it's very early. I think I will be also like Monica, who will talk afterwards about this experience. I saw myself in future when I was listening to Monica. Yeah.
I feel
thank
old
you
now.
No. But you just started earlier to do projects like this. Yeah. We have now the closing of the biennial. So in about 20 minutes, we will connect from all over the place. Yeah, I'm actually very, very sorry. Right now, I had to be in Warsaw. That was my plan, and I'm really, really sorry that the COVID situation didn't allow us to do this.
It will be postponed. I hope it will still take place.
Yes, I really hope that in spring I will come and we will do a offline presentation again, and I will
round 3
meet some of you there as well.
Thank you so much in participation in the discussion panel. Thank you that you took time for it, and you found it also important. And as Tina already mentioned, unfortunately, with heartbroken situation, we have to cut this conversation, and hope we can go on informally. And thank you for everyone who participated as an attendee as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Joanna, and your team for such a great project.
Cool. Bye-bye. I have to finish, unfortunately.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.